would best be described as an explorer in the world of the brain and mind research. Casey spent a decade traveling around the world meeting pioneers in psychoanalysis and neuroscientists, often in conflicting disciplines. Casey weaves a thread together of the two disciplines, showing us the benefits and making the connections, benefits of both, and how most often these two disciplines are in conflict with each other. Would you like to talk about your book a little bit?
Absolutely. Is this on? So it's such a thrill to be in India talking about this. And the way that this process started was in my early 20s, I thought I was going to be a psychologist.
Can you hear her?
Is this coming through?
No, it needs to be higher. Can you fix this, please?
How's this? Is this better? Yes? No? Yes. So I stumbled into the world of this interesting sort of rocky world that's full of disagreement in the United States and in England between this sort of very old-fashioned the world of Freudian thought and psychoanalysis as it persists and exists, versus the very, very modern area of brain research, of neuroscience. And I wound up feeling this is actually not what I was going to train to do professionally, but rather to write about. And that was the beginning of the book, probably nearly a decade ago.
I'd like to introduce Sudhir Kakar. Most of you know him, I think. He is a leading figure in the fields of cultural psychology and the psychology of religion. He has written 21 books, both of fiction and non-fiction. He's received huge number of awards and was called one of the 21 most important thinkers of the 21st century by Zeit. We are really honored to have him to contribute to this discussion. This is a session where I will speak the minimum because you need to get the benefit of both these people. Casey, you write about your experience in watching this film, The Great New Wonderful, with Maggie Gyllenhaal. And in that, Sudhir, what Casey writes about is that she remembers a scene in a particular way, and she's absolutely certain that Maggie has acted by nodding her head and moving her arm to communicate something. When she sees the film for the second time, she realizes that what she remembered, was not what it was at all. She had not nodded her head, she had not moved her arm, but what she communicated was what Casey picked up. Now, memory, which you write about in great detail, and we all know that for any one accident witnessed by 10 people, you will get 15 different versions, and Rashomon also is about that. What does this mean? I mean, today when we finish this discussion, I'm going to go home and think, oh my God, what a fool I made of myself. I didn't know anything. I don't know what I'm asking. And you'll go home thinking completely differently that you were so brilliant, which you are. How does one, are we then saying that there is no one memory that can be universal and match each other?
Well, actually, to me, memory is one of the most interesting subjects in neuroscience now. I think some of the most interesting and creative research that's being done in the world of the brain is being done on memory. And Madhu, I think what you're pointing to is this: how many people have heard of this idea of memory reconsolidation? Now, this is a sort of a radical discovery that only came about at the very end of the 1990s in New York. It had long been thought that if you remember something, if something happens to you and you remember it, that memory stays stable throughout your whole life.
Just now.
And that you sort of, periodically call it up in your mind and you watch it like a little movie, and every time it reflects what happened. And that was the absolute assumption in neuroscience for decades, until this young, sort of temperamental, sort of, cigarette-smoking 32-year-old neuroscientist who was studying emotion and memory in a lab at NYU in the 90s came along and realized, as he was studying these white rats and how they remembered the things that he was teaching them, that actually, when we remember anything, that memory becomes flexible and mutable and plastic, as if it's brand new, even when it's 10 or 20 or 30 years old. So that our memories are always shifting and always dynamic and always sort of subtly reinventing themselves according to our present circumstances. And when he realized that and sort of figured this out in the late 90s, there was so much pushback by his colleagues who said this simply can't be true because it overturns such a long-standing assumption in the neurosciences. Yet within 3 or 4 years, the data showed he was right, and this now is like the hot idea. There are labs for this all over the world, at Oxford, at Harvard, at McGill. This is the speed with which the brain world moves.
I think Sudhir will spend a few seconds explaining what psychotherapy and what psychoanalysis is to lay people, because it is really an underused and misunderstood discipline in India. So I think it would benefit us if you explain that, Sudhir, and then carried on with memory reconsolidation.
Okay. I think I'll just talk about psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is a psychotherapy, but not only psychotherapy, and there are many kinds of psychotherapy. So I'll
Can
just
you
stick
hear
to
him?
psychoanalysis.
Can
you
you
hear
hear
me? Okay. You can't hear me?
No.
If you can't hear me, they can't.
Can you make his
Okay.
mic a little higher?
All right. Psychoanalysis basically has
Just
three.
hold it while she fixes. Until she fixes. Oh, no, closer to your mouth.
Closer to my mouth.
Yeah.
Okay. Psychoanalysis basically has three assumptions, and all the rest of the theory you can leave it or deal with it however you want.
It's on.
And the three assumptions are that our unconscious mental life plays a crucial role in our personality and adult development, and that 95% of our mental life is unconscious. It's only about 5% of our mental life which is conscious. So our conscious life, what we are thinking, etc., is just a very small part, a tip of the iceberg. So our lives and how we behave, our motivations are mostly unconscious, which we are not aware. That is the first assumption. The second assumption is that your earliest relationships are very crucial for your adult development. Early childhood. So early childhood is very important for your adult development, and which we'll come to later. Psychoanalysis is very indebted to neurosciences for providing the empirical proof for both of these ones. For instance, brain imaging, etc., of rats show that there are about 1.8 million new synapses being every minute in a baby. So our brain is being wired, the software is being formed, and that depends on the connection with the mother, how much love is flowing through the connection with the mother. So most of our, as we go on developing, it comes through the love of the mother, the family. A rat pup, which is licked by a mother rat, you see, you can show it experimentally, is developing much more synapses than a rat pup which is not being licked. That doesn't mean you should start licking your babies. I mean, it is not a bad idea. So licking is good for babies in any case. So that is the second assumption, that our earliest relationships formed. The third is the role of desire. And I think most of people think about psychoanalysis as sexuality, that desire. But that is the third assumption. Now, so in very short, I can sum up psychoanalysis, which I just wrote down. So in summary, we don't really know our own minds, and we have powerful motives for keeping things that way. We don't really want to know our own minds. which you can talk of why not. Actually, we want to push everything into the unconscious. Consciousness is not something which the brain also wants. So we see life through the lens of our earliest relationships, though we usually don't realize it. We want contradictory things, and change is slow and hard. And actually, the only person who wants change in the world is a wet baby.
And you know, I was just going to add that it's so interesting that until really the 1980s, neuroscience kind of didn't totally believe in the unconscious. And this was actually a very pioneering idea brought by Freud and the analysts who followed him. And it took science, decades, more than half a century to certify that perception.
Yeah. And I think psychoanalysis needs to be very thankful to neurosciences for its rebirth, for its revitalization. Because by the 80s, starting from United States, etc., psychoanalysis was banished to the peripheries. Those are all fantasies. All other kind of psychotherapies came up, and of course the pharmacology. And then you get disenchanted slowly with all the other. The pharmacology is also going down, the other therapy is also going down. And neurosciences provided the empirical evidence for some of the Freud's original ones. Of course, psychoanalysis had developed a long time. Freud is dead for 100 years, so there's more to it than that. But so that is the positive part. What the contradictions are, we'll come to it later. And the memory, I think.
Yeah, going back to the memory reconsolidation, Casey, does this mean, I would ask as a layperson, of course, does this mean that we cannot trust any memory of our own?
I think some would say yes. I think some would say yes. What would you say, Sudhir?
That puts journalism in the toilet.
Yeah.
Because we write from, don't clap. She's clapping, it's in the toilet. Stop it. It's scary because you go in, you're going to look at something, hear something, report on it, and come back and from that memory write it, and it turns out that you're totally wrong. In fact, this actually happened to us in newslaundry.com 2 days ago when we sent a reporter to cover something, and in News Laundry we critique the press, so we catch their mistakes, we make fun of them, we do all that. But we found, this reporter said that NDTV had dropped certain footage which they had got in an interview in India, in Jantar Mantar, with some protesting people. And I said, well, before we run it, can you please call up Sunetra and ask her why she dropped it? We can't run it without her say. When this reporter who had put in the story looked at that footage again, he found that they actually hadn't dropped it. So there was no story for us. But can you imagine how scary that was?
Yes.
That if I hadn't asked him to check, we would have put a story in that was completely wrong from his memory, which was wrong.
Not to mention in the legal justice system, when we still depend on.
Well, as a psychoanalyst, it used to be the older idea. I think you know it from the movies, probably the old ones, where was that Stewart Granger or Cary Grant, and suddenly a memory comes up and they are cured. Now that is not the thing how psychoanalysis works at all. One believes that it is a recollection of old memories which will hit you, which is not true at all, because as you said, we do not know the memories. Person will come and say, my mother said when I was 5 years old that I'm a horrible girl who's going to grow up very horrible person. What did the mother say? One has no idea what the mother actually said, but this is her version of what she said. So psychoanalysis is, it's not important what happened to you, but what belief happened to you. So the belief about what happened to you is the right one, not the memory itself, but your belief of what the memory is. That is what we talk about.
Related to that, Casey, you've mentioned that when Sigmund Freud first went to work on his hysterical patients, many of them reported childhood sexual trauma, often at the hands of their own fathers. At first, Freud took them at their word, believing their recollections, which is what Sudhir just said. But by 1897, he made an abrupt reversal. You write, he said, I no longer believe in my neurotica, he wrote in a letter to his friend William Fleiss. The phrase became a part of psychoanalytic theory. Freud was now convinced that his patients' stories should not be regarded as facts necessarily, but rather as fantasies. yet fantasies that were no less relevant to understanding their symptoms than if the sexual encounters they described had indeed occurred. So this is even more confusing, that if you have a story about which you feel you've been traumatized, it may or may not be true, but you would be treated anyway. So for a lay person, that is extremely frightening.
Is it? What makes it frightening?
Because I would want to know whether I was really assaulted or not. Why am I wasting my time if I wasn't?
Except you're still sort of suffering from the experience, whether or not it exactly happened.
But I think I would stop suffering if I knew it didn't happen. So if I'm going to feed in it and feed on that fantasy and keep, as you say, reconsolidate it and make it stronger, isn't there some way to fix it?
Well, Sudhir, I think you'd be the better person to answer that question.
If there's something very traumatic, very, very traumatic, that memory is almost gone. I mean, that is so repressed that you won't have that memory. You will have feelings around that memory. Things can happen which reactivate it, but that memory itself is almost not to be recovered. Very, very traumatic thing. I think that also neurosciences has told us. So what will happen is you can find things around it, but not the memory itself. Whether the memory cures you, no, I mean, why should a memory cure you? Because you have to see all around what has happened to the memory. The example I gave is, if you believe that something bad happened, that my mother said this, that I'm going to be a horrible person, the exact memory does not matter. What matters is how I have processed that memory. And I process is, I am going to be horrible because my mother said so, or mother did something, etc. Exact memory does not matter. To process this one with the therapist, etc., is the important part of it.
Casey, you have written about Stanley Milgram, who drew a Hannah Arendt-like conclusion. Evil doing was nothing special. Now, Hannah Arendt's The Banality of Evil is especially relevant in India today, because specifically about the certain rapes that have taken place that were horrific. And there was a film documentary made called Daughter of India, which was banned. And I wrote an article against the banning, saying that unless we show how banal these people thought rape was, how ordinary it was, how easy it was to do, because it was to them very normal, we'll never be able to solve it. We'll never be able to get to the root of the problem unless we expose how banal it was in their culture. So you've also written that Milgram wrote that evil doing was nothing special. It was dormant everywhere, just waiting for the right circumstances to ignite, the right authority figure to come along and deliver his sinister instructions. Do you think people are so out of touch with themselves that they would do sinister things, as has been shown historically? But do you think today that that kind of influence will really make someone go out of himself and do something that evil?
Well, the experiment that I'm sure many of you know about that Madhu refers to is the classic social psychology experiment, Milgram's experiment, done at Yale in the 1950s. When Stanley Milgram decided he wanted to test, in the wake of World War II, he wanted to understand just how easy is it to push volunteers towards inflicting real cruelty and pain. So he his subjects came into the lab, and he said, okay, your job is to make sure that that person that you can see through a glass window is memorizing the list of information that you're giving them. And if they make a mistake, it's your job to deliver an electric shock to their skin. They're connected to wires. So the subjects, at first they were uncomfortable, but the electric shock, they were told, quote, you must go on. You have no choice but to go on. And they were told the electric shocks were getting more and more powerful and more painful, and they would see the subjects through the glass window writhing in pain as they were electrocuted.
Pretending to be electrocuted.
Well, what they didn't know, what these subjects didn't know, was that these were actually the people they were
supposedly electrocuting were actually part of the experiment. They were actors. But it was incredibly convincing, and very, very few people refused to continue because they were so taken in by the authority of these Yale experimenters in their white lab coats. And so to answer your question, Madhu, I think that if the circumstance is right, and if there are, all these clues and signals and cues that, you should obey your orders because you're at an Ivy League school with these prestigious doctors and scientists, then yes, I think unfortunately there is a tendency to obey.
Sudhir?
I think you're quite right. But it goes the other way around also. I mean, you can do that, but it also cures. I mean, all the doctors who have their big certificates hanging around, etc., and wearing those lab coats, is also contributing a lot to the cure of the patient's belief. This is a person who can cure. The higher the degrees, certificates down, the more doctor-like you look, the better your chances are of curing also of the person. I mean, the placebo effect also happens that way. But in this one experiment, there's a very interesting part of there's another one where a person is asked that there's a train coming, and there are 6 people down the line. If you push one person, then the 6th person will be saved because the train driver, after killing that one person, stops. So will you do that? Will you push that person? And the interesting part is the language which comes in. If you say it in English to a Hindi-speaking audience, they'll do it. But if you say it in your own language, they start hesitating. So language plays also a very important role in these kind of experiments.
Why do you think they would hesitate? They hesitate?
Because I think the language of your mother tongue has emotional associations with it, which the other language doesn't have. It is much more rational. So rationally, you are prepared to do it, but when emotions start coming into it also, then you are not prepared to do this act at all. And that would also, I think, at that time in that experiment would also come in. It is the rational thing. Your rational part is reacting much more than your emotional part.
Casey, in your book you've said Freud's intention was never to have only one perspective, only one method. Soames, you're quoting Soames, the man you followed. Would you tell them about Mark Soames? Because he plays a really great role in your book.
In a way, the main character of my book is this very, very charismatic South African man named Mark Soames, who's in his 50s now, and he lives in Cape Town, and he flies all over the world constantly because he's obsessed with his personal sort of cause, which is to bring these old psychoanalytic ideas into the modern landscape and mix them up with neuroscience and figure out how to even go about that. And so many people think that's such an unlikely or even impossible task, but it's sort of been his obsession and his passion project for 20 years. So much of the book sort of follows his work and why he is convinced this is the right thing to do.
So now I'm quoting Mark Soames, which you've written. Freud's intention was never to have only one perspective, only one method, Soames said. Even at the beginning of psychoanalysis, Freud took what he could from every discipline to try and cobble together a theory of how this might tick. He developed a pure psychology, knowing that one day it would be possible to supplement and correct it with neuroscientific methods, and he said that repeatedly. Soames carried on in his parallel careers, he told us, treating patients with brain damage who came into the neurosurgery ward at the Royal London, immersing himself in his psychoanalytical education in the evening. Despite the schism that had opened up between them, psychoanalysis and neuroscience were to Soames intuitively compatible. Now, that according to Soames, but you also came across a lot of psychoanalysts who were resistant to neuroscience, and neuroscientists who were absolutely contemptuous of psychoanalysis. Could you explain that a bit?
I think many psychoanalysts in Europe and in America are very threatened by, first of all, they feel very endangered. They feel, they represent something old-fashioned that fewer and fewer people are interested in engaging with. And they feel that neuroscience, which is the hot, flashy, sort of sexy, glamorous, branch of studying the brain, is kind of an existential threat, that it's where the future is, it's where the money is going, it's where the public imagination is going. So they tend to, not all, but many, tend to be ambivalent or resistant to really engaging in the ideas coming from brain research. And on the other hand, many neuroscientists think, how are we even still talking about psychoanalysis, which doesn't have proof, it doesn't have hard data or hard facts. It's no longer relevant from the point of view of many hard scientists. So this was sort of the problem that Solms faces and others like Solms face. Have you observed something like that, Sudhir?
Well, I mean, the first thing was what I welcome neurosciences was for providing the empirical evidence. But here I think I will go to the old-fashioned psychoanalyst, not because of the neurosciences part. Psychoanalysis is absolutely interested in meaning, understanding the meaning of hidden things. Does neurosciences provide the meaning? I don't think so. Of course, all our thoughts, whatever we think, there it is a biological substrate, it will have something in the brain. But meaning, when I say father, for instance, for an individual, a father can have a huge range of meanings which are not going to be captured by neurosciences. Also, in psychoanalysis, is that meaning is not fixed, stable. It doesn't have only one lighting up in the brain. Meaning changes all the time. It unfolds. How does one capture that? But the main objection, I think, is the, I will say, the biologization of consciousness, of mind, which neurosciences, because of it is so sexy, you said all those brain images lighting up, lights flashing all the time, that looks wonderful. And the main image is also very much that it is part at the moment of a whole Western view of that biology says the holy grail of biology in the next century is to riddle of consciousness. And that the consciousness will be found, there are brain processes interacting, and that is where consciousness comes from, mind comes from. Now that is something which personally I doubt it would happen, because it depends on how you see that. For instance, a very old-fashioned Indian view, of course, is that consciousness is not a process of the things happening in the brain, of those neurons and the synapses reacting with each other, but brain is only a filter. That there is a universal consciousness and our brain filters that, and every brain has all these kind of things, violence, sex, etc. So that consciousness which we get is our individual, but brain is only a filter. Consciousness does not arise in the brain, but comes from somewhere else. Now that is I said, a very old-fashioned one. Psychoanalysis, my Indian view, my psychoanalytic view would be that we don't really know. We still don't know how consciousness arises, and I doubt very much that it would come from neurosciences, which says that biology is going to be the one which will do there. And looking for consciousness there reminds me of a Mullah Nasruddin story. This is the Turkish stories, wisdom stories, and that Mullah Nasruddin once came home late at night, and he saw a man bending down under a street light looking for something, and Mullah Nasruddin asked, "What has happened?" And he said, "I've lost my key." And he said, "Aha, where did you lose it to your home?" And he said, "Down there." And he said, "Why are you looking here?" He said, "Because light is here." So that may be that there's so much neurosciences, etc., there's so much light, but the key is not here.
That's great. I love that.
Casey, you've written about Corkin. Corkin writes that although HM, which is a patient, began participating in neuropsychological studies in 1962, measuring every aspect of his memory, performance and behavior, no one thought to test his emotional state until the early 1980s. Now, can you test emotional states? Can they be documented? Can they be found and documented?
Sure. I mean, there's basic, standardized tests for depression, sadness, anxiety, things like that.
But that's from the response of a patient, like you ask me questions and connecting the dots, you then decide whether I'm depressed or sad or joyful. Is
Yes,
that how it's done? Is there any documentary, like an ECG, is there anything, or EEG, is there anything like that that documents emotional states?
Yes, but isn't it true that it's still self-report in these cases that's taken, that is considered to have the most value?
Is that, I'm talking about testing and establishing and documenting an emotional state.
There are various ways of their self-report, their depression inventories are for this and inventories for that. Of course, but for psychoanalysis, of course, that's not the important part at all of what that state is, but how do you start understanding that state. So, because diagnosis is really the unimportant part of psychoanalysis, really, because diagnosis is often trying to put people into categories, and what makes psychoanalysis attractive is actually that everyone is a unique individual experience, and we have to address that. And I think that is still what makes it attractive, and to keep it in a generalization. Science generalizes, that's how science proceeds. So you have to put them in categories, etc., is not a very attractive one for psychoanalysis, or what psychoanalysis would be attracted to do, these kind of, whether to develop these inventories or even look at the other kind of it. Fine, if they are there, it's fine, but that is not my part of it. Again, it comes from the whole thing. Psychoanalysis does not, main idea is not to remove symptoms. It is self-understanding. Self-understanding is what may remove symptoms, it may not. So you may be, after a course of psychoanalysis, after many years, you may become sadder, but you will be wiser at least. And that is what psychoanalysis wants. And that is, Freud's statement was that the goal of psychoanalysis is to turn neurotic misery into common human unhappiness. And Jung was that life is full of difficulties, and difficulties are good for health. To idea that you should give away, throw away painful emotions is not a psychoanalytic idea. You should understand them, and they will make you wiser, and then you can live with them. They may even go away, that is fine, the truth makes it go away. But that is not the goal of psychoanalysis, and that's why these inventories or diagnoses are not very interesting to psychoanalysis.
Casey, you've also written in your exposure between neuroscientists and psychoanalysts that you've written, I just spent 4 days staring into the formidably unbothered heart of modern neuroscience. I didn't know what the chances could be for someone who has bent on insisting that these same scientists take seriously the question of our inner lives. Are scientists now taking the serious question of our inner lives into account?
I think they are, but of course, inner life, it's, as Sudhir was just describing, it's such an ambiguous, unquantifiable, endlessly complicated territory. And, my character, Mark Solms, always says, science is very embarrassed by the human mind, and in some ways kind of doesn't want to engage with it fully. And they'd rather, many experiments shy away from the particularly sort of jagged, emotional, sort of complications of what it is to be human, in favor of cleaner, more data-driven questions.
Sudhir, would you like?
I would completely agree with that, of the huge complexity of the human mind, and which that is what makes it interesting also. And psychoanalysis approaches the human mind, or in the complete state of unknowing. We have no idea of who you are and who I am, and we are both going to start discovering, I hope, something together. But we have no idea where we are starting with. There used to be a sentence which was, approach each session without memory or desire. Every new session is a new one, not only the person or the so-called patient, but every session is absolutely new. Explore it that way, and that is the only thing you are going to discover, maybe something.
And how realistic do you think it is, Sudhir, as a clinician, to go in? No?
Those are ideals, really, but at least the ideals say, try to be as blank as you can when you approach that. Realistically, of course, you will have memories of the last session, you will think something about what the patient said earlier, but at least the goal is start every session absolutely new.
I'm going to veer away from my questions, planned questions rather. Casey, it would be great if you talked about your experiences with Dr. Solms. Here was a man who was seeing patients who were paralyzed, who were brain damaged, who were coming into the hospital. He had no idea actually what he was doing, but he was working with them, not knowing whether anything that he did would actually change them, help them, or even come close to curing them. Could you talk about his experiences that you've written about in the book, his passion of trying to fix severely paralyzed, brain damaged patients? And did he, because that's something that doesn't come out very clearly in your book, did any of these patients have remarkable recoveries?
Well, I should say that he was working as a young man in his 20s on the brain side of things as a neuropsychologist in this big sprawling hospital on the outskirts of Johannesburg. And this was apartheid South Africa, and he had so much more responsibility in a sense than he might have in a different circumstance. So he was seeing all kinds of things that normally a 24, 25-year-old kind of wouldn't be faced with. And what I think the main thing that he took from those years in that hospital was that actually brain theory didn't nearly explain enough about the symptoms he was observing in these brain damaged patients, that he needed a more psychologically rich base of information to really understand or penetrate what he was observing. And he then went to train in London as a psychoanalyst. And it was only when those two things came together for him that he thought, okay, now I'm on to something closer to a complete picture. And that was the beginning of his quest to really unite these fields. It was from working with brain damaged patients and thinking brain science can't explain it all.
Sudhir, have you worked with any brain damaged patients at all?
No, because I think neuroscience is very good at where the limits of psychoanalysis lie. I think they can find out from the brain that this damage, no language or relationship will come through. So I haven't worked with any kind of a brain damage
But
patients.
you accept that. I have personally a problem with that, because I've seen many cases where doctors have given up on patients and say that nothing's going through, they're not receiving anything, they're not thinking, the brain is far too damaged or paralyzed or covered with blood clots, just give up. And there have been families that I've seen who do not give up. And they go on relentlessly talking to the patient, playing music, families surrounding them with love, and they have found responses. So should we listen to doctors like that?
No.
I wouldn't. No?
No.
So I think that you reiterate that we should not give up. That if you have a person in your family who to the outside world looks at as far gone and there's no hope for, if the people who love that person can continue working regardless of what the doctors say, regardless of what psychoanalysts say, they keep treating that patient as there and communicating. Have you seen that happen ever?
I've heard of it, of course, of it happening. But I mean, any psychoanalyst would accept that, because that is what psychoanalyst also operates through. The power of love is so great that we don't really know how effective that can be. And psychoanalysis, the patient-therapist relationship is of love, actually. You call it transference love, but it is very much love, which is part of it. And it is not what the psychoanalyst has said, it's not the insights, but together with the feeling which comes between the two. So love is very much a psychoanalytic, you don't call it love, you call it all kinds of transference, counter-transference, these names, because you feel shy of calling it a love. But love is essentially one of the most important things which cures.
I've been told that we have to open the floor to questions, but before I do that, I would like, Casey, if you can, explain to us in your book where you see the conflicts between psychoanalysis and neuroscience, do you think that we are now reaching the cusp or the stage where both sides can see the benefit of each other, or do you think they're going to be far more divided, with neuroscientists going into more technological advances, thereby cutting off psychoanalysis even more, and psychoanalysts saying that they're just hardware?
I mean, of course I don't know, but I think it's interesting that I have seen that in neuroscience there is a sense recently of thinking, we're not quite getting to the answers that in some ways we expected to have already. With all this research and all this busyness and all this funding, and maybe it is time to sort of infuse or bring in a different set of ideas into some of the way that these experiments are being designed. Maybe we do need to do something to think more deeply about the mind itself.
Do you think there could be, I mean, this of course purely hypothetical, do you think there could be a new profession that marries the two? That here we have a neuroscientist, and like Mark Soames actually tried to do, since he did have the training, do you think there could be a new profession where a neuroscientist also is a psychoanalyst?
That certainly can be, but then he's either a neuroscientist or psychoanalyst for me. There is the two perspectives. There are two perspectives. They are very different perspectives. They don't have to be in conflict with it. But the perspective, that one perspective is that meaning is what is important, and not these biological substrates, what's happening in the brain. They of course they are there, but they are not the important part. We have to go through meaning. That is saying like, here is a painting by Van Gogh. Of course you need the chemistry of the chemistry perspective, the paint, how it is done, the canvas, how it is done, but that does not say to the artist's perspective what made the painting. So those two perspectives, whether the paint and the canvas and there's chemical composition, etc., absolutely has to be there. But the other perspective is the artistic perspective. I'm kind of splattering psychoanalysis now by putting them into the art one. But that is also a very important perspective. And how do you combine those two? They have to be there both with each other and both say, yes, you are right and you are right.
Casey, is there anything you'd like to add before we go to questions?
Oh no, I'm very curious to hear questions.
Okay. Anywhere, go ahead. Now, don't give speeches, quick questions if you want to give everybody a chance.
My question to Cassie, please comment on 3 terms. Number 1, neuron envy, which people like.
Neuron and?
Neuron envy.
Neuron envy?
Envy.
Ooh, that's intriguing,
Neuron
that phrase. What
envy.
does that mean?
Which might be nurtured by people like Kakar and people on the side of humanities. Number 2, the charge of reductionism which is made upon you people, neuroscientists, by the people from humanities, that you are indulging into reductionism. And third is your comment on neurology of identity, which late Dr. Oliver Sacks propounded so well in his clinical tales. And Madhu Trehan was referring to that every individual after a brain damage has an altered neurological identity, which because of brain plasticity can keep on improving.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do 2 of 3. Just to say quickly, neuron envy, I love that phrase. I've never heard it said like that. But I think that it's true that there's a lot of anxiety in fields like in the humanities or in psychoanalysis where there's a sense that, oh God, we don't seem serious to the world anymore because everyone is so interested in data. So that's why you get, you constantly see these, as Sudhir said, these sort of flashy graphs and pictures of the brain lighting up because people feel that substantiates their arguments. So that's definitely a thing. And about reductionism, actually, it was when I was studying neuroscience that I thought, that's in a sense what motivated me to want to do this book, because I felt there was a lot of reductionism, and it sort of scared me how we were flattening and making small our picture of ourselves. So that was actually the spur for writing this book.
Hi Sudhir. Sudhir here. My question would be to you. So in the initial start of the session, you said that for a child, the early relationship with mother goes a long way in shaping what kind of a person that child would become. So my question is, why only the relationship with mother? Why not with both the parents? Is it coming from the patriarchal construct where the mother is a primary caregiver for a child, or is there a biological reason for it?
What I said was starting with the baby, and that is one who always says with the mother. Of course, then the other family comes in, the father, everything comes in, because the brain keeps on evolving. It's not that the brain is fixed after 2 years. If we have 50% is genetics, say, of our psyche, then 30% of early childhood, then there's still 20% of adult development. Actually, brain is a social and cultural organ much more than a biological one. I mean, it keeps on changing. So mother means something, mothering person, whoever is taking care of it. It doesn't have to be the mother. So the caregiver and caring and the love which flows through that connection is the one which I was talking of.
Hello. Actually, I've asked this question to my psychology teacher also. But the thing is, the scientists use the word brain the psychologists use the word mind. So is there a difference between the two? Do they overlap? Are you addressing two different things? What is it exactly?
I'm curious, where are you studying?
I'm sorry?
Where do you study psychology?
I studied in Mithibai College, Bombay.
Huh. Well, I mean, most neuroscientists would say the brain is the mind, end of story. But people who aren't in that field don't necessarily say that. And they say, actually, you can't quite reduce the mind to the brain. So,
Who has the mic?
Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Dr. Shetty, and there are two kinds of memory, short and long-term memory. And long-term memory is intimately connected with emotion, rhyme, and rhythm, or M equals ER squared. Eric Kandel, in his studies, showed that repetition of something will make it a permanent memory.
Question. And just put the mic closer to your...
Question is, we shouldn't go away with the idea that all memory is short-term, but that there are certain memories that are long-term depending on how the frequency with which it is remembered. Nursery rhymes are never forgotten, and you can never say that a nursery rhyme is false memory, or any of the things that you remember forever, even till you're 100 years old, is permanent, and that depends on continuous repetitive input into the brain, where multiple pulses of serotonin will produce more synapses in the brain and produce more
Are you
sites.
giving a lecture or asking a question?
I'm here to them a question or answer to my lecture.
Answer to your lecture. Okay. Do you have an answer, Casey? No. Okay, fine.
Hi.
Yes.
So I've read Brian Weiss's books, Many Lives, Many Masters, Only Love is Real. And since we're talking about the impact that memory has, short-term, long-term, and we're talking about how memory can help resolve an issue or not, Brian Weiss has a very interesting concept of past life regression therapy. And I was wondering if you could comment on his therapy.
actually, Sudhir might be the better person to take that question.
Well, I mean, psychoanalysis also has a concept of past life regression. But the past life in psychoanalysis is the forgotten life, the first 3-4 years of life. That is also past life, and you produce karmas there also, which then affect your added life. But a life before that, regression, etc., that becomes quite kind of problematic for psychoanalysis. Because what we have is, we have anecdotal evidence. Unfortunately, the anecdotal evidence of past life, I've never heard of a past life being a rat or a snake. There's always some kind of king or a daughter of queen, etc. So it's much more, to me, past life vanity than past life regression.
I want to give this girl a chance. She looks so agitated.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, just right now when you were talking about past life regression, so there's something like called shamanism, which is...
Put your mic closer, yeah.
Okay, is that better? So there's something called shamanism, which I came across on Dr. Newton Kondavetti's website, where the premise is that they take you through a journey of your past, which is based on your soul. So the soul remembers, has memories of the past life, which could be the source of what you termed as neurotic misery. So this question is also meant for you because you said that when she asked you that if, you know, can you trust your memory? You said most would say no. So the basic premise of shamanism is that your soul has memories from your past lives. So do we trust, and it has been that there have been cases where people have you know, known, who have resolved their issues on through this therapy. So is that to say that we cannot trust our memory because, well, this is way into the past?
Yeah, it's a great question.
And
Yeah. Okay.
The same question
I
to
think
you,
both
because
of you
where
should
does
handle
energy
that.
fit into psychoanalysis? Because energy is a very upcoming concept, and meditation is something that has known to have scientifically proven to have therapeutic effects on you.
Right.
You see, there's a big difference between what is therapy, what cures. Almost everything cures. So curing is not the important, because what is the relationship? You know, placebos which are given, placebos cure almost as much as real medicine. Just the difference is very, very little. So curing and every kind of therapy cures. So curing is not the part of it which is important here. Curing is, I think, often comes from the relationship which you have with a therapist, guru, or whoever is the other person involved there. So that is where curing happens. All the rest is what you kind of dream up, or correctly and incorrectly. That's not the important part. Psychoanalysis itself has a vision of life which is not there or anything about past life. It is, life is a journey of this life full of incomprehensible afflictions of fate which you have to suffer. You pursue your pleasures and fantasies, and it will come to an end when you die. That is all, which does not allow for the other one. So that it does not work on the terrorist past lives, etc.
Casey, I
No,
think
I
you
was
might
just
want
going to
to
add that it's in, the whole body of work called attachment theory in psychoanalysis is, in a way, it sort of is about past lives, because the idea is that, the way that one generation, let's say one grandmother, is attached to her baby, predicts how that baby in 30 years will be attached to her own baby. So in a sense, there is that, to me, that is a past life idea that's robust in psychoanalysis.
I think I completely agree with that. Past life in the sense that you are part of a river of life which comes from ancestors and will go through you and go through your children, but not your individual past life that you are going to be there, but you are part of a river of life.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, there's a notion which is called infinite intelligence, which was coined by the author of book Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy. So it tells that our subconscious mind has everything, the solution to everything. So is it really some kind of infinite intelligence? And if we have this infinite intelligence, does that mean that we are some kind of gods? Like we are having a solution, we can re-innovate, we can innovate, we can have great ideas by this kind of subconscious mind. He tells in his book. So do we really have this infinite intelligence and infinite power?
Can we ask that question, leaving out gods, because then it narrows it to a more this thing, because gods takes it to another realm.
Yeah.
Sudhir, Casey, either one?
The unconscious mind has about 1 million times information processing capacity as our conscious mind. So you are right in saying that we have a great deal of so-called knowledge in our mind, and sometimes, but can we access that knowledge is the important part. Whether our conscious minds can access that knowledge, that is the very, very difficult. We can come to very, very little part of it. Freud, of course, believed, he had that our unconscious impulses, etc., are like two horses, and our conscious mind can control it. That, I think, neurosciences has deepened Freud in saying, no, it is much, much worse than that. Our unconscious mind is like an elephant, and our conscious mind is like a small mahout on top of the elephant. So if you want to control the elephant, forget about it. The elephant will go where it will. So you have to just keep it nudging in the directions it wants to go, and maybe you will succeed. So our power over what our unconscious mind wants is very, very little. It may have a lot of knowledge. The elephant is a great animal with a lot of knowledge, but whether we can control it or not. I mean, for instance, for my psychoanalysis, if I learn that I am attracted to beautiful narcissistic women, that is not going to stop me from being attracted to one, because my elephant goes at it. But my conscious mind can only stop me from marrying one and then blaming myself and all the rest of the world for my misery. So that's all what conscious mind can do.
Do we have time for more? Who has the mic? One more, last one.
Hi there. So
Sorry?
quick question to Casey and Sudhir. What are your thoughts on CBT? Because obviously back in the UK, the big push has been in recent years, it's been towards CBT, and there's been a big move away from psychoanalysis. So
No, and in the States too. CBT, for those who don't know, is just sort of, it's a more, in a sense, you know, on the surface therapy that's shorter, it's more specific. You come in with a specific problem, and your therapist says, okay, we're going to deal with X, Y, Z thing, and then you're going to go home. And it's not an analysis that goes on for years. I mean, I'm not a clinician, but from my point of view, you know, it sounds good. It's just that I find psychoanalysis much more interesting and much more sort of creative and deep. That's what I think.
Okay, we have time for more.